It sounds to me that they
Yeah.
would benefit first from that debasement, and then the negative consequences would kind of trickle
Yes.
down the
Yeah. Yeah.
society like
Yes.
they do in modern times.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's what people who, and I'm not a Roman economic historian by any means, but that's what my colleagues who are um, would broadly tend to assume.
Hey everybody, welcome to Bald Guy Money. I am Bald Guy, and this is a special episode today because with metals prices pulling back, people are getting nervous. In fact, the same people that were telling me in January in the comments section that gold wouldn't finish the year above $2,000 are now panicking that it's fallen to just below $2,600 an ounce. So in moments like this, I think it's important to zoom out and take a look at how far we've come, because despite the ups and downs, we remain in a solid upward trend for gold. That trend has not been broken, and the price today is 181% higher than the average price since 1990. For silver stackers, the same applies, despite the famous blow-off top event in 2011 and 2012, because overall the trend remains up. It hasn't reversed despite this scary pullback, which so far has performed in line with my price pullback targets that I showed you all 2 weeks ago, and the price of silver today remains 127% higher than the average price since 1990. So in this video, we are going to do the ultimate zoom out. We are going to zoom out a couple thousand years as we chat with the world's #1 authority on ancient Roman history. You may recognize her from her documentary series on Rome done by the BBC, or you may recognize her name from the many books she's authored on the topic of ancient Rome. She is Cambridge University professor and historian Mary Beard, and she joined me for a chat this week to discuss some topics that were as relevant in ancient Rome as they are in 2024, including the role of gold and silver as money and wealth preservation tools, government welfare and handouts. We discussed wages and the economy, banking, land ownership, inflation, and much more. Now, just before we dive in, if you're in the United States and want to buy gold or silver at a great price, just like these products here, which I think are the best deals going right now, please be sure to check out www.summitmetals.com. All the products they sell are verified to be authentic, and the service is first class. It costs nothing to check them out, and I think it's worth your time and worth giving them a shot at earning your business. Now, without any further ado, here is my conversation with Mary Beard. So I'm honored to have the opportunity to sit down today with English classicist, trustee at the British Museum, Cambridge University professor, and author everybody, who specializes in the history of ancient Rome, Mary Beard. Mary, welcome to Bald Guy Money.
Uh, Thanks very much. It's great to be with you.
What I like most about what you do is that instead of focusing solely on emperors and the elites of Rome, you really provide people with a clear view of what the lives of Romans who lived under those rulers was like. And in that line of thought, what can you tell us about some of the ways Romans earned money, including, of course, jobs they worked, but any handouts they may have also received? And did those handouts look anything like social welfare does in the 21st century?
Um, that's a trickier one than it sounds. I mean, people often look back to ancient Rome and they say, look, um, one of the things that you could get given as what looks like a social welfare handout to us is a regular dole of what I call in the UK corn. I suspect if we're in America, it's wheat, right? Um, and people say, look, this is an early form of welfare payment. Now, in a certain sense, it might be. But I think what's really interesting about the Roman case is it doesn't go to the absolute poorest. It goes to people who are citizens. It is a perk of citizenship. It's not a welfare benefit. Um, so if you're not a citizen, you don't qualify for getting the free or sometimes subsidized wheat. And that's, I think, quite a good example of how careful you have to be about assuming that things that look a bit similar in ancient Rome and now really are quite the same. Because I think that handout of wheat is an interesting. It's interesting because it's about what you qualify for by virtue of being a citizen. Now, that apart, you can find all sorts of things that look similar. You know, I suspect that if you go to the real ordinary people of, let's say, ancient Rome and Italy, and it wouldn't look too different, I suspect, outside, you get people picking up money by day laboring, by casual work. You know, I think it's the ancient equivalent of the 0 hours contract, really. They are, you know, they're turning up and getting money at the docks. They're volunteering to give a bit of help for cash to the local carpenter when he's got a big job on. And so forth. Now, it's hugely complicated in Rome because of the importance of enslaved labor. So I'm here talking about the urban free poor, but of course, an awful lot of the grinding work, the very, very low level agricultural labor, for example, is being done by people who are enslaved. So seeing it from our point of view, there isn't that sense of a labour market in quite the same way. There is, and we know because we see on their tombstones, we see free people or maybe ex-slaves who are making money in all those kind of ways, or you know, selling things, or being flower sellers, or dealing in pearls if they're a bit more upmarket. But it's hugely skewed for the average person. And I think the other thing that we have to kind of put in the picture between labor, selling your labor, or sometimes your skill, selling your labor or your skill, and the handout, is the sense that Rome was a very hierarchical society, where you did expect to form a relationship with those a bit further up the tree than you, and you would expect them to help you out when needed. So the idea that your patron might tide you over, now that's something that is not at all found in the modern world, but I think was terribly important in ancient Rome. You looked up the social hierarchy for help.
So it sounds like maybe they had a little bit more of what we would call a gig economy, even in the 21st century. Now, many of my viewers who watch my videos like to comment in the comment section of my videos by saying a denarius was what a person earned for a day's work in Rome. And for those of people watching this video who are not familiar with the denarius, I have one here that is a silver coin that was a denomination of the Roman currency. Now, what I wanted to ask you, Mary, is do we know if that's true throughout the entirety of the empire of Rome's history that they were earning a denarius a day? Is that period specific or does it only apply to certain occupations?
It is one of the most complicated things that you can possibly start to wonder about. Now, I'm going to say, you know, for a kickoff, that that's not a bad rule of thumb, right? That, you know, a denarius a day, it's certainly not universally true, and it's not universally true, you know, at all periods. But I think you could do worse by starting with that, you know, you know, little factoid. So, and I think what the problem is that we have, you know, in all sorts of different, from all sorts of different sources, we've got some indication of what a man or a woman might get paid for a day's labor in, you know, 3rd century Egypt, or we've got you know, a little scrap of evidence from 1st century BC Rome. Then we know what soldiers get paid. That's often a really good baseline. We know that in the reign of Augustus, soldiers are getting paid 225 denarii a year, and that goes up to about 300 at the end of the first century AD. The problem is putting all that together and knowing how typical it is. So I think if you go back to soldiers' pay, which looks like, you've got really good, clear evidence for that in literary sources that we believe are reliable literary sources. But it's very hard to know what they actually have to spend, what that money is for. I mean, how much, for example, are soldiers being asked to pay for their own uniforms and their own fighting equipment? I mean, I think of this as we often get little scandals about budget airlines where the cabin crew have to buy their own uniform. Well, that might be an issue in Rome. I mean, so if you think of 225 denarii, if it's pocket money, that looks pretty good. If you're getting your food, and your uniform and a place to sleep because you're, up the base, that, looks as if the soldiers are doing reasonably well. If they've got loads of deductions from that, and there are certainly some deductions, it's a different kettle of fish. So I think it's always terribly hard to get a big picture from which you can generalize, particularly when you move from the capital to the provinces, and it is a reasonable bet, just like now, that you get higher wages and there are higher prices in Rome itself than in some benighted town in Rome of Britain, and it changes by period. There is inflation, so it's actually getting an overview. That's what's hard. You can certainly find guys and probably women too who are earning your denarius a day. So it's, in that sense, it's not wrong, but
Okay.
you the full picture is a lot more complicated.
Okay, I do want to talk a little bit about the inflation aspect, but before I ask you about that, what I wanted to ask you about is if Romans were able to save a significant amount of what they earned, how did they save? And another question would be, did banks play a role at all in storing their savings? And what do we know about that today?
That is, again, every question you're asking me, takes you into one of these black holes, which are absolutely fascinating, but it's very hard to give a firm answer. One question that I think has puzzled a lot of people is how wealth is stored. Now, if we go to the upper echelons of Rome, in a sense, wealth is stored in land. You put your money into land. Land is what guarantees your wealth and keeps it, right? So uh, part of the answer for the very rich is that. We know that if you go more to the idea of, what are my valuables? What would I like to make sure didn't get stolen? Where some of my wealth is residing in that nice silverware that I've bought. Now, sometimes we know that they use Roman temples. They use temples as strong boxes. And there's one temple in the Forum, the Temple of Castor in Rome, where we know people used to deposit their valuables because it was a good lockup, really. And we also know it was a target of thieves because we have jokes about people's valuables getting nicked from the Temple of Castor. So, that's one thing. I think that the further you go down the spectrum of Roman social life, you you come very quickly to, I suspect, the majority of people who don't have savings. They do not have savings. And
Much like
I think
today.
I think it probably is much like today, although we're always told by our government that we shouldn't. We should make sure we save. Um, and you see that there's a very fine line, I think, between managing, managing by getting a bit of labour, um, by help maybe from your patron or whatever, and being destitute. And I think that one of the things that is hardest to take about ancient Rome, when you think about poverty at the bottom, um, is that poverty, I'm putting this horribly crudely, poverty was a problem that solved itself because ultimately the destitute died.
Mhm.
Um, and it's very hard to get much of a glimpse of them because they don't leave a trace. We hear complaints of people who've living in tombs or kind of having a sort of little shanty town under an aqueduct. We occasionally there's some interesting wall paintings at Pompeii, which shows what looks like a beggar in the Forum. Um, but you can't get a picture of the really poor, and it's hard to know how quickly people could fall through the bottom, but I suspect quicker than we imagine. I think that it's a precarious, unless you have property, unless you're a landowner, um, it's a very precarious existence. And we look at tombstones, and they're telling us, it's not bad being dead because I don't have the rent collector coming around every week. They wouldn't say week because it's Rome, but you know what I mean. And I
So,
think yeah, banks are
oh, no, no, no.
extremely, but they're not like our banks. I mean,
Okay.
I think we think of banking as we think of it, well, either at the very upper echelons, it's Goldman Sachs, or it's our local Wells Fargo high street bank. We try to put a little bit of money into our savings account. Banking doesn't work like that in Rome, although we confusingly use the same term. Uh, and you see that most clearly, and it's really worth looking him up, in Pompeii, where the the account records of a guy we call a banker, Caecilius Iucundus, were discovered, still preserved after the eruption. And we can see what this guy is doing. And our friendly banker in Pompeii is basically um, uh, a street hustler with a bit of means. He's lending money for people to buy things they need, right? I mean, because one
Like
of
a
the
loan
things
shark, like a loan shark.
is basically a loan shark, and he's charging interest from everybody, right? And so if you think about some of the jobs that we're talking about and imagining, um, they require some kind of capital investment. If you want to do couriering, if you want to do, I'll carry your wood from one side of town to the other, you need a mule, right? And you've got to buy a mule. So there, even at the bottom, there's quite big items of expenditure that a poor person would be faced with. Well, it's clear that they go along to Caecilius Iucundus. Um, he provides them the cash for the mule, but at a very, well, or at a, he would say, at a decent rate of interest. And my guess is that if you don't pay the interest, we know exactly what Caecilius Iucundus will do. He'll come and take the mule back, right? Um,
Something like Crassus when he would show up at your house when it was on fire and offer you a fair deal to put the fire out, right?
That's right. And I think we're seeing that, right down the bottom, that kind of model in a much smaller way happens right at the bottom. The guy's also an auctioneer and he's making money there too. Because if you want to buy, let's go on with the mule. If the mule is being auctioned, um, he will, again, or a nice piece of silver it could be, or it could be a little farm. He will take his commission on the auction and lend you the money to buy what you want and take the interest off that. So he is making it at every place along the line. And of course, you see that what he is catering for, he's an absolutely essential part of the local economy in Pompeii. What do you do if you need, well, in our terms, what do you do if you need to buy a new washing machine? Well, we can have it on installments, where we're also paying interest.
It doesn't
In
sound so
Pompeii.
different from the modern banks, Mary, to be honest, when they take a fee for the Forex exchange and then they're charging you 23, 24,
Okay.
25% in some instances on your credit card, ATM overdraft fees.
Yes,
He
okay.
sounds
Yes,
like this guy would
yeah.
fit in very well in the
Yes,
21st
okay.
century
Yes,
in JP
yes.
Morgan.
Yes, okay. I mean, you put it like that, I think that's not unfair. It's I I think that I think he's also quite rough. I suspect that you wouldn't want to meet Caecilius Iucundus if you owed him something walking down a back lane in Pompeii late at night. Whereas I think my friendly overdraft broker at Wells Fargo doesn't threaten to do me over.
So I mentioned a moment ago that I'm a Roman coin collector. I don't know how you feel about that. I know some people are not crazy about the idea of, common people holding the Roman coins, but I have many of them, and many of the coins that collectors get are found in hoards, usually found in pots where Roman people, whether they were citizens of Rome or people out in the provinces, stored a lot of their coins for savings. Now, my next question is, why is it if there weren't proper banks like we understand them today, and obviously gentlemen who will maybe break a finger or even more if you get involved with them the wrong way. Why is it that Romans turned to hoarding coins?
Yeah.
Were they trying to protect against debasement, or was that really their favorite option?
Yeah. Um, Again, the true answer is we don't know, but we can make some good guesses. I mean, I think that um, if you sort of modify a bit what I've said, I've been pretty extreme about the destitution problem in Rome, and we tend to forget that. But if you go up a little way to the people who are managing okay, they're not rich. Um, they've got a bar, right? They've got a bar and they're buying and selling wine, fast food, and they're managing and they make a bit of a profit. Now, and let's go back to Pompeii because we know most about that. Um, what you can't do with your local neighborhood banker, Caecilius Iucundus, it isn't a deposit bank. So you're going for money, you're paying interest, but you're not saying, I'd like to put, 500 denarii on deposit for a year, right? What the banker there is doing is facilitating transaction. He's not taking your cash and giving you a small rate of return. So what do these people do with this? I mean, if you've made a bit of a profit, well, one possibility is that you take it to your local temple. I suspect we know about this in Rome, but I suspect that the temples in other cities are actually acting as a kind of strong boxes for people. But also, and you see this in Pompeii, you've got a big chest, a big wooden chest with great metal bars around it and a lock, and you shove it under the bed, really, or in the front hall, or on the upper floor of your bar. When you've just had a great sort of fantastic, good, few days, selling your best wine, and it's gone down very well, and you've made a few denarii. You put it upstairs. Now, and I think that's likely. I think that's by far the most likely. I think then the issue about hoards is, so why do we find these hoards? Well, probably they are a consequence of threatened disaster in some way. You know, you there's a terrible flood coming, right? You you got to beat it, or let's say in Pompeii a volcano is erupting. You're going to beat it with your wife and kids, and you're not going to leave your money behind, but your money is weighing you down. So as you flee, you see this great big tree, a landmark tree. You'll never be able to forget it. You dig a hole, you shove the money in there, and you think, right, I'm going to come back later. When this is over, I'll come back and get the money. It's hidden under that tree, and I'll never forget it. Well, actually, sometimes you do come back and find the money, I'm sure. Other times, you don't make it out, or you forget which tree it was. So the hoards are often the unsuccessful attempts to find a place to put the stuff.
I have two denarii with me today. I have one from the Republican period, and I have one from the time of Septimius Severus. And if I look at these denarii, I mean, I see that the one from the Republican period is significantly thicker. It weighs more, and I'm sure these coins lose a little bit over time, but I can see that there must have been some debasement in the currency between when this Republican denarius was struck and when this one was struck by Septimius Severus. So going a bit deeper, since I mentioned debasement, you mentioned inflation earlier, what can you tell us about currency debasement in Roman times? When there was debasement, also, I guess I'm curious, did prices adjust to reflect that debasement like they do in modern times?
We imagine so. I mean, I think that what you have to reckon is that the idea of economic policy in our terms, the idea of any sort of policy in our terms about anything, by the emperor or by the central authorities, it's really an anachronistic idea. I mean, I think that you come across it often. You're going to say, people will say, well, what was Nero's policy on Parthia, right? And you think, well, I don't think Nero had a policy. By and large, Rome is reactive and it wants no trouble. It's not sitting there and thinking, now if we were to put a legion here, and in
Just for clarification for my viewers, Parthia would be what modern day Iran is, like
yes,
the
yes.
Persians, correct?
That's right, and always a big load of trouble for Rome. It was a rival empire. They thought of themselves as rather upmarket. The Rome we know about them through Roman sources mostly, where they're treated as a very dangerous, a very dangerous load of guys on the eastern borders of the empire. So, even thinking about military policy, I think is probably just inappropriate and anachronistic. I think even more so economic policy. It's not clear how Rome planned. And basically, if there should, emperors have got one weapon to kind of make do, which is to lower the metal content, the precious metal content in the coinage. That's that is their only economic weapon. And of course, they do that, and we believe and we assume that the same kinds of issues that we would imagine in an inflationary environment then happen, that prices go up. But it's very hard to track that on the ground. Very, very hard indeed. And I think the other thing that one has to realize, and again, it just shows how different the ancient economy is from our own. So why Republic is a little bit different, but not very. Why are emperors minting money anyway? What are they? What do they need it for? And in the modern world, we're thinking about commercial transactions and exchange and the economy of the high street and all the rest. That is not I think, not anywhere in a Roman emperor's mind. What he needs to do is he needs to pay the soldiers, right? He needs money to pay the soldiers. He also needs money to pay for his, let's say, his building works in Rome. He is not doing it to facilitate what goes on at the local bar. Right? And in a sense, the commercial offshoots of the coinage are secondary to the fundamental need, which is to pay the troops and to pay for putting up the Forum of Trajan or whatever.
It doesn't sound so much different than how it works today, especially when you think a little bit about the inflationary aspect of it, because it sounds to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that if there was some kind of debasement, the emperor, so to say, because my understanding is that the emperor was responsible for minting gold and silver coins.
Technically, yes. So how
Technically,
this
okay. But it sounds to me that they would benefit first from that debasement, and then the negative consequences would kind of trickle down the society like they do in modern times.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that's what people who, and I'm not a Roman economic historian by any means, but that's what my colleagues who are would broadly tend to assume. I think the problem is that the only way we have really of understanding the Roman economy, because they don't tell us, right, is to use what we believe to be fundamental economic rules from the modern world and to kind of work, play them out in the ancient world. Now that may not be misleading, but we're not getting the kind of any sort of gritty analysis about economic circumstances, failures, successes, what you might do. I mean, I think it's very, very interesting that there is only one place that in surviving Roman literature, there's only one place where a kind of what looks like a hard-headed profit and loss calculation goes on. It's when the geographer Strabo says that conquering Britain, if the Romans were to conquer Britain, he's writing before the invasion of Claudius in the mid-first century AD, if the Romans were to conquer Britain, it would be a financial disaster because it would cost more to take and hold Britain in terms of army, troops, etc., than the profits that you would get from it in terms of lead, nice woolly cloaks, and I'm afraid, because it's Rome, slaves. Now, that is the one place where we actually see someone doing a simple profit loss estimate. And if you think, that's the only time. Now, I'm not for a minute suggesting that those kind of calculations weren't in all sorts of people's heads. That's down to, the local barman who thinks, well, if I buy the really upmarket wine, would I really be able to sell it for 12 asses rather than 6 asses? I'm sure all those practical calculations must go on. But we only see it. We only actually see it once.
Now, I've read SPQR cover to cover, and I've read 12 Caesars cover to cover, and I even have a photograph of myself, and I'm going to be sharing it on Twitter soon, of myself with 12 Caesars translated in Polish. And I have, yeah, so, you're very popular. But I can't remember which one I read it in. I believe it must have been 12 Caesars, where it mentions that Domitian was one of the only emperors to manage the money in a way where the metal content actually increased during his reign. Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, it's more or less, yes. In fact, I think what's quite interesting is that some of the emperors that we think of as the bad ones, the bad boys, are actually, in some ways, if we look at signs for economic prosperity, we find that perhaps they were the hard-nosed realists, and Domitian is one
Is
of
there
those.
proof that under Domitian there was more economic prosperity potentially linked with, sound money management? I'm just going
All
out on a limb here.
all we've got is, we're extrapolating back from from the coinage, and also, we're also extrapolating back from little bits of evidence, largely preserved in inscriptions, where it it does appear that instead of being this mad sadist, who was, more interested in killing flies than in running the empire, somebody was running the show pretty effectively under Domitian. No, it might not have been Domitian, it might have been, but we have, inscriptions put up where during the reign of Domitian, where he's an as it were, signed off by him. But, you never know. Somebody signs it off and says, this is the decision of Domitian. We don't really know who took it. But, looking as if business as usual is very definitely going on. And what's interesting, I think, is that, but in fact, that's true throughout the Roman Empire. That you can't, at least up to the 3rd century, you can't see a moment when whatever the lurid allegations are about the spendthrift, luxurious, sadistic, and immoral guy on the throne, it does seem that somebody is doing the work and running the shop.
Okay, so some people today like to draw parallels between the fall of ancient Rome and the United States, and they say that the USA is in decline, much like Rome was in the 3rd and 4th centuries. Without getting political, I'd like to know if you see any of those parallels, and is US debt, for example, one of those potential signs?
You're getting above my pay grade now. It's I think that the problem about this, and Gibbon in some ways was brilliant, but his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, has, in a sense, focused, everybody on the idea of imperial decline, right? And from my point of view, I wish I could begin to really understand what goes on in the towards what we would call the end of the Roman Empire in the West. Now, you have to be careful when you're talking about the decline of the Roman Empire, because the Byzantine Empire in the East thought of themselves as Romans and lasted till the 15th century. My husband is a Byzantinist, and when I talk about the decline of the Roman Empire, as if that might have happened in the 3rd and 4th centuries, he looks baffled and says that in his part of the world, we're going strong until the 15th century. There's all kinds of issues, but I think nobody yet, and it's one of I suspect one of those insoluble conundra. Is it decline? Well, it depends what your measurement of decline is. Are we talking economic? Are we talking military? Are we talking cultural? And there's a one very popular strand of scholarship on this, and I'm not sure I go along with it entirely, but it was what I was brought up with, which is that what we're dealing with here is a huge transformation of the Western Roman world, whether you call it decline or not. In a sense, well, that's up to you, but you've already prejudiced the argument when you call it decline. And I think of this much more in cultural terms, because that's more what I have I work on, and I look at these people like, the Vandals of North Africa. And the Vandals of North Africa have got a terrible reputation, haven't they? Partly because they're called Vandals and we use Vandals, they're supposed to be coming and destroying everything. Now, you go and look at what the Vandals are doing in North Africa. They're codifying Roman law and they're writing wonderful Latin poetry, right? Now, and so, coming along and saying, look, it's a slippery slope downwards here. Well, it depends what criteria you have. And, I think there has been a tendency for people to take a period that we understand very, very fragilely, honestly, and use it then to talk about us, and it's you name your empire, and then you say, it's declining, just like the Romans. And the Romans, I suspect, would be sympathetic to that in a way, because one of the things that was absolutely embedded in the idea of Rome's version of long-term history was that empires rose and then they fall again. That nobody stays on top forever. They actually thought they were declining from the 2nd century BC. Right? Now, we think, blimey, the 2nd century BC is when everything's going really well. They thought, we've conquered too much. We're on the downward slope. And famously, Scipio Africanus in the 2nd century BC, in the final destruction of Carthage, which was a very brutal campaign. And Scipio Africanus, sorry, did I say Africanus? I mean, Aemilianus. Too many Scipios around. Scipio Aemilianus, who finally destroys Carthage. The actual city destroys it. He's spotted as he watches the flames destroy the enemy city. He's spotted crying. He's crying. And he's reciting bits of the Iliad, Homer's Iliad. And somebody says to him, what are you crying for? You just won, right? This is victory. And and he says, it's because the same thing's going to happen to us one day. And so there's a sense that empires rise and they fall, and if there's an inevitability in history, it's that rise and fall of empires.
But if I've taken something out of our conversation, especially kind of pivoting back to something that a lot of my viewers are interested in, it's that another thing that seems to be universally true is that wealth, at least in the Roman times, was built through land, gold, and silver, not much different than it would be today.
It's not built on financial enterprise. It's not built on that, and it's not built on manufacturing, and it's not built on technological advancement. Those are there are some things, you're absolutely right, really do overlap, but I mean, one of the things that is very puzzling that, here the Romans, Greeks and Romans, we should put the Greeks in here, they're really interesting scientific thinkers. They are, highly observant, theoretical, imaginative on paper, but they don't make any technological advancement at all, really, apart from a bit of advancement in milling, in water mills. And one question has been, how is it that this, highly acute scientific society, in some ways, I'm not saying your average barman was a scientist, but there is in Rome and in various bits of ancient Greece, highly acute scientific thinking. It never gets a practical element. Now, the easy answer to that, and it may be true, actually, is that slavery put the brake on it. You didn't need technological advancement because you had, it is imagined, a fairly unlimited supply of cheap labor. And so slavery, in effect, was a block on Roman development, and nobody needed to have the kind of technological advancements that we think about when it comes to making profits in the post-industrial revolution, certainly.
Okay. So this book, from what I understand, this is your latest book, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
This is your latest book. Now, I suppose people could buy this probably from Amazon or anywhere, correct? Where do you want them to buy it from? Would be my question to you.
Well, I think, well, try Barnes and Noble. But I have to say that although, as you rightly guessed, I'm the kind of person who thinks, oh, Amazon, that's a bit naughty. I do confess that I tend to buy things from Amazon too. So I want people to buy it. From your local bookstore, bricks and mortar bookstore would be lovely, but don't feel too guilty if you do it online.
Well, I thank you so much for coming on the program and talking a little bit about ancient Rome, a little bit about how their economy worked, how their money worked, how they stored wealth. Uh, Basically, all of these things. And you want to know what, in the wake of the latest presidential election, I'm on social media a lot and I'm seeing people bickering about this and that. And I just think it's fantastic that two people from maybe different sides of the political spectrum, maybe we think differently on some things, can get together and have a really fun conversation about things we're both really passionate about.
Well, thank you, because I think that's really important. I think it's so important, but particularly now, to be able to disagree without just abusing each other and without thinking we've also got loads and loads in common as well as differences. So if the Roman economy is what binds us, I'm very keen on that.
By the way, I also loved your debate with Boris Johnson, which I've watched a couple times on YouTube, and that was a fantastic one as well. So that's just, in that same line of thinking. Again, thank you very much for coming on the program, and I'm wishing you a fantastic day ahead.
Thank you. And you. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much to everybody who made it this far in the video. Thank you very much for watching this conversation that I had with historian Mary Beard. I am going to end this video by showing you all a calculation I did in 2022 to determine what the value of silver is today based on ancient Roman food prices. I will link up the video link to this below if you're interested in checking that out. But before I finish, I want to ask you all for your feedback on this video. I want you to let me know if you want to see more episodes like this where we talk about gold and silver in the context of history and ancient history. If so, I will try to do more like it in the future. And please remember, if you found this content interesting or valuable, please share it with people you know. That helps the channel grow and gets my message out to more people. And if you want more of my content, please remember you can join my Patreon. Joining also helps support what I am doing here on the YouTube channel. And with that said, everybody, as I say to end all of my videos, I'm wishing you all a fantastic day ahead. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Goodbye.